All right, guys. I'm gonna get back to the beginning here. Sorry, started at the end. All right, this is your Unit 7 video guide for your exam. The unit itself is entitled 19th Century Perspectives and Political Developments. It's sort of an in between of sort of Napoleon into World War One. It's got big themes such as the scramble for Africa, but really we're not going to, we're going to talk about that a little bit. But our focus is going to be on sort of these little things going on. Okay, it's a very different unit. All right, let's talk briefly about the art movements of the 19th century here. The first two really that we need to know are Romanticism and Impressionism. Romanticism challenged the rationalism of the Enlightenment. Remember, the Enlightenment was all about science and order, reason and logic. Well, as far as an art movement goes, Enlightenment would be more realism. Romanticism challenged that idea and felt that senses and emotions were equally as important as reason and order were as far as art was concerned. So Romanticism valued a good imagination and links to nature. It took things that looked sort of real but romanticized them. Okay, think of the romantification of medieval knights. How they fought for their lady loves and this and that, but in reality, that's not really what they were. So the art movement is sort of like that. You're going to see a lot of naturalistic paintings, man in nature, man out in an ocean on a ship in a storm, battling the elements. That's Romanticism. Okay. George Washington standing up in a boat, crossing the ice-choked Delaware in the middle of a blizzard. Romanticism. Now, Impressionism came a little bit later and very much turn of the century, 1900 type area. We consider it modern art. It felt that art should move beyond representational and towards the abstract, meaning that you don't have to draw something how it looks in real life. All right, you get the sort of the big three are Cubism. Pablo Picasso is sort of the father of Cubism, and you've all seen that type of art using geometric shapes to create like human beings and stuff. You can tell they're supposed to represent human beings, but no human really looks like that. Dadaism is sort of collages and stuff like that, collections of other pictures and fit to a theme. Surrealism is beyond real. All right, melting clocks. Think of the melting clocks painting. Okay. Now, the Ottoman Empire plays a role in this time period because the sick old man of Europe, as it's becoming. Remember, the Ottomans were the most powerful place in the world there for a while, and they're on the boundaries of Europe. But as the Ottomans begin to lose power, you started to see this rise in nationalistic movements in an area called the Balkans. The issues going on here in the Balkans are going to upset the balance of power because a lot of those areas were controlled by the Ottomans, or they were controlled by Austro-Hungary, and it's a bunch of different ethnic groups who, thanks to Napoleon and the rise of nationalism, believe that they shouldn't be run by an empire, that they should have their own state that represents their people, their language, their culture. Serbia has a big issue with nationalism. And you've got Bosnian Serbs, you got all these different ethnic groups and stuff. It's going to really help lead to World War One in our next unit. The Greeks have been dominated by the Ottoman Empire for a very long time, since 1453. And now the Greeks are going to fight and win their independence from the Ottomans as the Ottoman Empire continues to shrink in on itself. Okay. Again, that's going to lead to a lot of issues, and it's going to be the Balkans that leads us into World War One. Now, the two big unifications of nation states in this time period, of course, are Italy and Germany. Italy unified in 1860. And sort of the big three that you need to know is Garibaldi, Mazzini, and Cavour. Cavour led Piedmont in the north, which was sort of the richest, most powerful state in the north. Remember that Italy is broken up into all these city-states that compete against each other for prestige and for economic might. Garibaldi was more of a southern guy, and he favored Victor Emmanuel as the monarch. And Cavour and Garibaldi, they don't really get along that well. Cavour doesn't trust Garibaldi because Garibaldi has sort of these Republican ideas and stuff. Remember that way back when Rome was actually a republic. The men were not friends, but one thing that they could certainly agree on is that they cannot stand outside control of Italy. So while they may not agree on the means and necessarily all the items that go into it, they both agree that Italians should be controlled by themselves and not by France, not by Prussia, not by Austria, none of those places. Now, there were several key issues that Italian unification faced. One of them was Vatican hostility. The Vatican state is in the middle. It's Rome. It's rich. It's important. And unification, I think they fear could take away some of their power. There wasn't a equal tax system, so you have regions of Italy that are upset with other regions. There's enormous government debt that is an issue. Who's paying off the debt and all that stuff. And that the northern and southern, we think of Italy as just being Italians, but just like America, there's a difference between Southerners and Midwesterners and people who live on the coast, the New Englanders. We have cultural differences. Well, Italy does too. And so Northern Italians, speak a different language. Their culture is different than Southern Italians. So that's a key issue that Italy faced in their unification. All right. Switching gears over here to France and the larger issue of anti-Semitism in Europe and the world, we get the Dreyfus Affair. This was a Jewish soldier. He was French, but he was a Jew as well. And France finds him guilty of passing secrets to the enemy. He makes an easy scapegoat, but he's not guilty, even though they find him guilty. And a couple of years later, there's this, they look into it. Some outside people look into it, and they find out that he was innocent. But the French government is going to shut those people up, force them into exile. Anybody who supported the idea that Dreyfus had been wrongly accused was punished by the French government. It took a long time for France to admit they were wrong in this. And it plays out as a big scandal in public affairs, and it definitely politically divided France. Again, the anti-Semites, dude's guilty, clearly. I don't trust Jews. I hate Jews, that kind of stuff. But for others saw the evidence and said this man's been wrongly accused and his life has been ruined. They would eventually reinstate Dreyfus in like 1906 back into the military. But a lot of damage has already been done by then, of course. So big keys with Dreyfus. It takes place in France. It's government cover-up, and it's all about anti-Semitism. All right. You got a couple of people here who really, they're new thinkers that are challenging age-old ideas. One of those is Einstein. And Einstein, his most famous thing for you to remember is his special theory of relativity, which challenged the old Newtonian physics that said the universe operated by set rules. What goes up must come down, the gravity and all that stuff. And Einstein took it a step further. And, what it did was cause a little bit of uncertainty because up to this point, we've been operating on the fact that there was rules and everybody followed the rules. And then Einstein sort of upset that balance. Sigmund Freud is the father of psychology, psychoanalysis. His big ideas were the id, ego, and superego. He also supported sublimation. The Oedipus complex, which of course is the son sexually desiring his mother. All right. Repression, things that childhood trauma that you could actually forget because you've repressed it in your mind so much. And, that was one of his big ideas. You have Friedrich Nietzsche, who was a German philosopher. He's affected by the success of the Enlightenment. That logic and reason has won out. He declares that God is dead, and that religion has sort of lost its place in society, which, you can argue that it has, and you can definitely argue that it hasn't. Okay. Europe isn't as religious as it used to be, but religion plays a large role around the world still to this day. He rejected the bourgeois morality, which was sort of based off of religion. Think of it as your hardcore Christians. He doesn't. He's not with that. All right. Which it's kind of ironic since he dies of syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease. I find it kind of ironic there. But yeah, Nietzsche is questioning old beliefs. He's a new thinker, so he's influential in that way. This isn't a thinker, but a new thought process called positivism. Positivism, the value of science as a way of understanding the world and society, because technology had made daily life so much better, so much easier. There were so many improvements. Uh, People value science, and you still see this today. People put a lot of stock and a lot of faith in science, even to this day. Scramble for Africa was sort of there's not a lot of test questions on it, but it's one of the easier ideas to understand. Africa was there. It had loads and loads of raw resources, but it wasn't industrialized. It didn't have the infrastructure set up for it. And Europe took advantage of this. Europe's better technology that they had acquired with machine guns, with steamboats, opened Africa and Asia up for them. And at the point of the barrel, basically at the point of the gun, they took what they wanted. They divided it up and they exploited the entire continent. Now, you had 7 different European countries, but really the big 3 was Britain, Germany, and France. They owned the most territory in Africa and Asia. They were the 3 powerhouses. Britain itself certainly relied a great deal economically on their colonies because Britain is smaller than France and Germany. Britain doesn't have as many resources as those larger countries have, so they're getting a lot from their colonies here. Liberia, which was the American colony of freed slaves, and Ethiopia were the only ones to remain free. Remember that Ethiopia had got its hands on some guns and were able to repulse Italy's attempt at colonizing it. All right, Germany will also unify in this time period, whereas Italy unified in 1860. Germany is going to unify in 1871. The Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck is the big architect of this unification. Once he gets Germany unified in 1871, he declares them a satisfied power. That he's not looking for a lot more. He's going to end up brokering the Berlin Congress of 1884 and 85 because the other countries felt that he was a straight shooter. But he's still going to push German. He still wants what helps Germany out. So he doesn't want to let Britain become too big of a powerhouse. They're going to thwart some attempts at Britain creating a railroad that travels from the southern tip of Africa to the northern tip of Africa, linking their colonies. Prussia is the big dog of the old German states here. They're going to unite all these northern states through these military actions of Bismarck, and thus they're going to gain the authority to sort of speak on behalf of the Germans. All right. 19th century women, what are we seeing with the overarching theme there? That the biggest gains for women in this time period are going to come in the fields of writing, whether that's writing for newspapers or writing books. Women are finally gaining some ground there. They're still going to be kept out of professions such as doctors and lawyers and in public professions such as that. So still facing some limitations, but slowly fighting and scrapping and gaining, an inch at a time here. And lastly, the germ theory, again, it's linked with science, new ideas that are challenging old ideas, the old Aristotelian ideas on what makes people sick and how sickness spreads. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch got together, and they have the microscope, and they've done these experiments, and they realized that hand washing and sanitation led to shorter epidemics, and diseases were less infectious when people were clean, when they had hygiene, when we had sanitation. You look at the relevance of this and today with the coronavirus. So absolutely, these guys are going to change the world through their science. Okay, guys, that's it. My advice to you, of course, is to make note cards and process this information and understand it. But repetition's key, and that's where the note cards come into play, is that you repeat these things until you can remember them. Back in the old days when you had to remember your telephone number, how did you do it? Well, you kept repeating it until you finally got it. I mean, I can still tell you my telephone number from when I was a kid. And I haven't punched that number in 25 years. All right. So to a smaller degree, for you to be able to pass a test, you've got to retain the information. So it's going to take you repetition to do that. Okay. I hope this helps out, guys. And good luck on your test. I know you guys are going to do well on it. Okay. Thank you. And we'll talk to you later.